Wow! The Earth rising over the horizon of the moon. And humanity is facing a very serious final exam. On that Earth, it's a woman in the Americas. She's standing in the highlands of Macuiltianguis, Oaxaca, in her milpa, a centuries-old intercrop field of beans, rice, and corn and squash. Her ancestors have sustained for hundreds of generations. The forest behind her is one of the most biodiverse places on the planet, holding the memory of 10,000 years of indigenous knowledge. A system of agriculture and forest management so sophisticated that modern soil scientists and ecologists are still trying to learn from it. Her name is Xochitl, and she has a smartphone in her hand. And on that phone, she is training her AI agent in Zapotec to manage her microbank loan for her solar irrigation system. The loan is financed by a remittance savings from her brother in California through a Contigo Migrant Sustainable Development Bond, inaccessible up until very recently. At that moment, in Xochitl's hand, in her milpa, in her family stretched out across continents, is one of the most powerful, three of the most powerful forces in world history are converging simultaneously. Force one, the great global rebalancing. So after 5 centuries of constructed Western economic dominance, the global South is now once again producing more than half of world's output, reversing a 500-year temporary great divergence. Force two, global nature crisis. Xochitl's milpa and her forests hold the knowledge and biodiversity the entire planet depends on for our survival. And it is under severe threat from the same logic that created that wealth of the global north. Force three, the AI explosion. That smartphone represents the most powerful productivity multiplier in human history, with the potential to let her community leapfrog over the entire carbon-intensive path that let the North get rich in the first place. These three forces, one moment, one exam. The question is not whether we can pass it. The question is whether we're going to choose to do it. Now, watch this moving timeline. What you're seeing is 2,000 years of human civilization compressed in a few seconds. The red line is the global South. The blue line is the global North. And for most of the last 2,000 years, the global shares of GDP were relatively equal to global shares of population. The world, for most of its recorded history, was not widely divided between groups of rich nations and poor nations. But now watch what happens in 1492. That's when modern colonialism, capitalism, and imperialism are born. The conquest of the Americas, the deliberate dismantling of indigenous economies throughout the global South, enriching one part of the world and leaving the rest behind. That is the great divergence. It is not a natural process, not an accident of geography or culture. It was a constructed economic order. Then the 19th century industrial revolution. Steam, steel, railways. By 1950, the North held 70% of world GDP and a per capita income that was the widest gap in all of recorded history. But then, watch after World War II. The red line begins to rise. Post-war industrialization in Latin America, Asia, Mexico, Brazil, Korea, China, India. A second great pulse of industrial productivity, this time in the South, until 2006, when the two lines cross. And for the first time since the 1500s, the global south is producing more than half of the world's output. A trend, by the way, that will continue well into the 21st century. Xochitl is living through the reversal of those 500 years of constructed inequality. That's force one, and the exam has begun. Force two, the world turns urban. Now watch what happens when I add a second line. This is the green line that shows the percentage of humanity living in rural areas, over 90% for most of world history. Then urbanization begins, and nature recedes. Accelerating to 2007, when for the first time in 10,000 years of agriculture, more human beings are living in cities than in the countryside. That's the same year of the economic rebalancing crossover. This is not a mere coincidence, but a feature of our extractive economy. Massive migrations across borders are now producing $700 billion in family remittances, greater than all foreign aid and foreign direct investment combined. That's Xochitl's brother in California sending money home every month. But that migration also leaves behind Xochitl's milpa, her forest, her watershed. 80% of the world's remaining biodiversity exists in territories where indigenous and migrant communities like hers live and are stewards of the land. And they are all under severe threat right now. The nature crisis is not an abstraction. It lives at Xochitl's feet every day. Force three, the carbon trap and the AI wildcard. That black line is industrial carbon, near zero for most of human history, and then accelerating in the 19th century, and then rocketing. The North industrialized, the planet warmed. And now the South is industrializing. And if it follows the same carbon-intensive path, climate math becomes catastrophic, unless something changes that equation. That smartphone in Xochitl's hand, talking to her AI agent in Zapoteco, is that change. Artificial intelligence is the most powerful general-purpose, life-changing productivity surge since the first tools. It does not require a coal plant. It does not require a century of capital accumulation. It does not require nature's destruction, not necessarily. As the marginal cost of intelligence is soon approaching zero, AI productivity growth is more than capable of eliminating all global poverty and restoring all of nature's capital and biodiversity. A farmer in Oaxaca can access her own transformative AI agents, same as a hedge fund manager in Manhattan or Dubai. That is the AI inclusive wildcard that can potentially make abundant world as a future for all of us. Or it could create a fortress AI future that can make global inequality worse than ever. Now, these three massive forces are presenting the critical test for humanity. And guess what? We're failing. There are many on the planet who see this great rebalancing graph and fear that it means the great loss, the final mortal decline of the North's dominant position in the world, that migrations across borders will threaten rather than increase the North's income, that climate change is either a hoax or a doom loop. But the immense power of AI will also eliminate all jobs and incomes. Some fear that overwhelming global forces leave the North no choice but to adopt a politics of make the North great again, of creating a fortress to defend and fight for the imperial nationalist interests. Well, let's look at the mathematics of abundance. Mathematics is already proving the core answers to the final exam. And I want to be very precise about this. The great rebalancing is not being driven by the decline of the North. It is being driven by the surge of the South, leading to a new surge of the North. The impact of AI, under the most conservative estimates, will significantly raise the income of all groups to unprecedented levels and in an astonishingly short period of time. The Northern Fortress AI scenario can be shown to be significantly inferior to all the global equity and inclusive scenarios of an inclusive AI. The mathematics of AI productivity growth demonstrate that the elimination of poverty with universal basic income for every human being on the planet is possible. And the restoring of all nature capital and biodiversity is also achievable within the next 25 years. And rather than reducing the incomes of the North, this is how American incomes grow great again, while maintaining their first position of global levels. Our UCLA modeling shows that under inclusive AI governance scenarios, the South productivity rate could equal that of the North's. Countries that never had landlines jump straight to smartphones. Countries without coal plants go straight to solar and geothermal. The second mover advantage of the South, enabled by AI, benefits the entire planet, North and South. I've been building computable general equilibrium models with my colleagues and collaborators all over the world for 30 years. And I can attest to the scope and capabilities of the new AI-powered revolution. In fact, this talk will be accompanied by an AI-enabled agent, allowing us to continue questioning, debating, and envisioning this great global rebalancing long after we leave this auditorium. And in every scenario where AI governance is inclusive, where both North and South access the productivity gains simultaneously, a demand feedback loop kicks in. Lifting the bottom lifts all, as never before in human history. The global South becomes wealthier is not a threat to the United States. In fact, the South is the North's largest growth partner. The choice is not between American prosperity and global equity. It is between a world where there are both and both flourish, or it is a world where both suffer. Now, let me show you how the abundance scenario can actually get implemented. I'm going to introduce you to what we call the IMFC, Indigenous, Migrant, and Frontline Communities around the world. 3.5 billion people. 500 million are indigenous. 2 billion are people who are in families who are linked to migration. 260 million are foreign-born diaspora living in communities in the global North on the front lines of social and environmental inequality. Combined, this diaspora-linked economic activity is the third largest economy in the world. Chicanx and Latinx in the United States alone are producing more than $4 trillion, a GDP greater than all of Japan. These are not passive victims. They are the world's most dynamic actors. Xochitl and her brother are not waiting for development to reach them. They are that development. The Contigo Migrant Savings Environmental Bond is an example. People to people, AI empowered, community governed. And here's where I want to make a claim that very few economists from conventional institutions can make. The discipline that makes sense of all of these three forces in the world today is Chicanx studies. Not because it's my field, but because the Chicanx experience is the laboratory of transnational intersectionality. It holds both indigenous ecological knowledge of the global South and the economic agency of the global North. And this IMFC intersectionality occurs all over the planet, from Kenyans in London to South Indians in Dubai to Yunnan workers in Shenzhen. They're all Chicanos. The abundance scenario is clearly mathematically achievable. The innovation mechanisms are already operational. The new financial architecture is clearly on the horizon. So why isn't this happening? Because the issue is not the mathematics. The issue is humanity's social contract. Who captures the productivity gains of AI? That is the question being answered right now in the governance structures of the largest technology companies, in the trade policies of governments, in the financial regulations that determine whose savings can be mobilized. None of the AI-inclusive positive scenarios, by the way, will happen without transnational and transcultural dialogue between humans and their AI systems. And with the 3.5 billion people long excluded from the dominant narratives and discussions of development. As I tell my students, all avatars of the world unite. The agentic economy is coming. The question is, whose AI avatars will be at the table when it arrives? So let me show you what passing the exam actually looks like. The equity loop. AI productivity reaches the global south inclusively. Xochitl's brother invests in her community through a migrant bond. Her irrigation system produces a surplus. Her children stay. The per capita gap across borders closes, not in a century, but in a generation. The nature loop. Her bonds fund the forest behind the milpa. Indigenous LLMs encode the knowledge she holds into the AI systems that monitor and protect it. Nature positive becomes economically rational, not just morally right. The peace loop. When North and South grow together through demand feedbacks, when the material basis for conflict dissipates, the Thucydides trap becomes a choice, not a destiny. Let's go back to Xochitl, standing in her milpa, smartphone in her hand, talking to her AI agents in Zapoteco. She's not a data point. She's not a case study. She is the answer to the exam, if we choose to learn with her. We have the technology, we have the mathematics, we have the knowledge, along with 3.5 billion people in the IMFC waiting 500 years to be part of this conversation. What we do not yet have, very important, are the institutions for democratically empowering our collective global intelligence. That is the key to the exam. The Great Divergence was built by 500 years of constructed inequality. The Great Rebalancing has barely been underway for only 50. The AI explosion gives us, for the first time in history, the productivity tools and the economic surplus to potentially envision and complete that great rebalancing, to close the gap, to restore the nature, and to choose the peace. The question is not can we, the question is will we choose to? Thank you.